So our next speaker for the evening started with crypto back in 2013 when he heard of Bitcoin. He gambled his way through many bull and bear runs over the years with a very exciting journey backing him. Luckily for us, we'll get to hear a bit of it today. And he's a very highly successful angel investor and the founding partner of Arcanum Capital. Welcome, Karthik Bupathi. All over to you for all that you have to share with us.
Good evening, guys. I believe the majority of you guys are based in India. I'm actually based here in New York, New Jersey area. Thank you for the introduction. I'm really happy to be here. I remember speaking to Amit when, and one of our partners named Rahul about when we went on this kind of advice on this Polkadot venture. And I'm truly kind of astonished to see like how fast and how big this community is getting. And it really just kind of affirms my bullish thoughts on India as a landscape for just rapid blockchain innovation. I mean, the people here are just simply extremely hungry. But yeah, I mean, I could just go into like a quick introduction about me. So like I'm founder of Arcanum Capital. I've been in crypto since 2013. I first stumbled upon Bitcoin when I was in college. I was a broke college kid, so I couldn't really buy that much, but it was fascinating to me because as a technology, it was just so interesting at the time. Back in that day, 2013, 2014, if you wanted to like get involved, the only way was either buy Bitcoin, or if you were broke or you were more of a tinker, you could, buy mining rigs. And I did that process in college. I didn't have any electricity. I just mined using the utilities. I thought it was free money, but it was very competitive back then because you would be mining random altcoins. And it was simply Wild West. I mean, crypto is still Wild West now. It's a little bit more organized. But like kind of going through my journey, at once, Ethereum launched in 2015. It basically broadened the design landscape, right? It was once Ethereum launched, it was just like, there's other things that you can now do in this space besides being a brokerage, right? Which was the primary business, right? If you want to run a business, it was be a brokerage or just be a speculator. With Ethereum now launched, you could actually become a builder, right? You could actually build protocols, you can build infrastructure, you can build, today you're seeing DeFi building blocks. So it basically broadened the building landscape. And I think that was really the start of when we started seeing, smart people actually leave their traditional tech jobs and actually start coming into crypto. But I would say at that time it was a little bit slow. Kind of fast forward to 2017, 2018. I think we saw, Polkadot got incepted, right? It only launched, a year and a half ago, but we started seeing these different ideas of layer ones come out, right? And to me, I think like I was never really an ETH maximalist. I think that every layer one has their own advantages, right? Like, today we're now seeing, Ethereum, they say it has the highest level of trust, biggest ecosystem, right? Most developers, the chain of culture. But, now you see Solana, for example, low latency, right? They say that it might find its use case with, the DeFi applications, right? If you're building derivatives, structured products, you would probably want low latency, and ideally Solana might make the most sense. And then there's also the other kind of train of thought, right? The school of thought, which is multi-chain world, right? And I think kind of Solana and Ethereum existing together, right, kind of validates that, is that we live in a world where chains can have different use cases, and ideally you'll focus depending on your use case, you'll build on that chain, and ideally in the future, these chains can seamlessly connect, right? Because there'll be bridges, what have you. And yeah, I think what am I getting at? I think it comes to the idea of like Polkadot, right? I think, the world is definitely going to be multi-chain. I think in 2017, 2018, there are a few projects I advised. Two of them came out of India. I worked with Sentinel, DVPN, and then I worked more recently with Persistence. But yeah, I think like kind of my development of thought was just like, the world will be multi-chain. We're going to see specializations. Eventually we might see like enterprise use cases or like even centralized entities, right? Like your traditional finance plugging into DeFi applications. So yeah, I mean, I think the idea was like, and I think Polkadot thought about this really early on, was just like the world is going to be multi-chain. There will be specializations, and I think, you know, now coming fast forward to today, I think people have now accepted that. I think people did not think about that for a while. It was really ETH was going to take over everything, but I think today the world has kind of now, or the industry has accepted that there could be, you know, multiple parties and multiple bridges working together to connect these blockchains. Yeah, so I think like in terms of, you know, I've been operating in this space, you know, since 2017, right? And more recently, I started a fund called Arcanum Capital. A lot of my partners, you know, one of our main partners is based in India. And the idea behind what I believe I see what's happening was that I do see that the Indian landscape is growing. I think the blockchain ecosystem is in a severe lack of developers. So there's significant kind of upside intellectually and from an opportunity standpoint for developers to come into the space, because it just makes sense. It's so fascinating. It's basically a perpetual loop of learning. And I truly believe that India has one of, I mean, I don't even believe India does have one of the biggest developer ecosystems in the world. There's various communities. You have some of the biggest Golang communities here. You have some of the biggest Rust communities here, relevant to Substrate, right, which is heavily in Rust. And I do believe that we are on the cusp of a lot of these, you know, young, you know, students not saying only AI and saying blockchain, right? I think that's starting to happen now because we've had significant successes within India, right, with Polygon, especially, right, just kind of paving the way and making the space so exciting. So yeah, I mean, to kind of like talk about our fund, like our fund is kind of heavily focused. We're on kind of seeding Indian companies, right, or Indian founders. We believe that the blockchain ecosystem here is going to grow exponentially. And we really focus and work with founders at the earliest stages, right? Because I think because the space is still kind of early for founders here, I think that they need resources, they need advice on protocols to build with, how to get from point A to point B, how to fundraise. I think that space is still evolving within India. It's not as mature as, you know, obviously America or Europe or even China for that matter. So I think that there's value for funds like ours to be there at the early stages and helping them through their journey. So yeah, I think that's just kind of my story, how I got from point A to point B, and how I went from, you know, self-investor, right, to a builder, right, and to now like just now institutional investor at the VC side. Yeah, so I mean, this kind of talk, you know, I want to talk about a few different things, right? This was meant about angel investing. Where do you start, right? I think people always think about the space is like there's so many different things. How do you become like an angel investor? Or just, I would say investor in this case, because in like if you think about this space, right, there's so many ways. Like in traditional VC, angel investment is like, you know, speaking to these founders, these builders, and getting into these private stage companies. But I think in crypto, it's a little different because projects go live a lot quicker. So you can actually get invested in companies a lot earlier before they actually realize their perceived success. What is an example of that is just like, if you look at the past 2 years, you saw DeFi protocols, right? Like a lot of them are valued very low, right? They're valued at, you know, 10, 20, 30, $40 million, right? For valuation perspective. And for context, right, if you look at traditional VC, right, angel investment, traditionally see a lot of these seed deals happen at those valuations. So what I'm trying to get at is that you don't actually have to be a private angel investor in this space. You can actually buy these on open market and be early to these protocols and have the same upside as angel investing. And I think that's the democratic approach that I realized in crypto, is that if you put in the work and you do the research, you can actually get into projects at angel valuations, despite them, like they don't have to be like unlaunched, they could be open market. So I think that's something to keep in mind. But I also get into like how you can get to angel investment within the space, right? Pre-launch, and like how can you build, you know, research disciplines, and how can you get close to these builders, which is very important, relationships. But yeah, I think like, where do you start, right, in the space? I think some of the most important things for me personally has always been like research and learning. I've been doing that since 2013. I've been doing that continuously. You know, I think you have to, some of the resources I use, there's a variety of different newsletters you can follow. There's like Global Coin Research. There's, if you're into like seeing DeFi projects launch, there's the Daily Ape. And there's a variety of different ones on Twitter that you could find. You just have to do some research. I can perhaps share that with Ananya, maybe a list, and then she could share it with you guys later on. But like a lot of my time every day is spent on like joining project discords, building a Twitter. I follow a lot of different people on Twitter like that interest me from a build side. I don't really spend time looking at traders, right? I spend my time looking at builders, right? And at projects or sectors that are more interesting, right? For example, if I like NFTs, and I want to get into them, I find people that I think have seen success in the space, and they have some eye for NFTs, whether it's like minting, whether it's communities that they see growing. I just follow these people where I just continuously keep learning, right? I think the I don't know, it's a feature or a bug, right, in the space is that you never stop learning, and like if you do not spend the time in, you will get left behind. So for some that might seem daunting, but for me, I think for the people that really thrive is just keep learning and understand that it's always going to move forward. And as long as you kind of put in the work and you keep researching, you will always kind of figure out what interests you, right? And I think there's multiple sectors in the space, right? Like I think in 2014, 2015, or even 2016 for that matter, it was very easy to like be on top of like one sector, one protocol, or like just follow one place. Or like, sorry, it was very easy to cover the whole space. But today, the space is so big and so wide, and there's so many different sectors, so many different communities, so many different ways to like actually create value and understand what could be valuable, that I feel like it's probably better for you to focus on certain, like a few things than everything. Because if you focus on a few things, you'll actually know that, you know, ecosystem or that product or that protocol or that community in and out, or the sector in and out. And then you'll achieve success, in my opinion. It's just too broad nowadays. Another thing that I also recommend as well is like crypto is pretty big. You know, if you're starting out, you're a young guy, young girl, and you want to figure out how to navigate it, I always recommend like building groups of friends, right, together as a team, and you guys research it and you talk about these things and you kind of build like a cabal. I think like crypto to me only got substantial interesting, and I think success only started once I started collaborating with other friends, you know, in a win-win scenario. I think the space is so broad, and like with a team, it's very easy to like, you know, basically cover more ground, right? Like quite literally, you know, different focuses. And I think that was something that really evolved with me, because there's a lot of things I could learn from my friends and a lot of things that, you know, they learned from me, right? Because, you know, it's just, research is multidisciplinary, like it's very broad, and I think everyone can contribute to it. So yeah, I think that was like one of the few things that were really pivotal for me. Like I spent a lot of time on Twitter, spent a lot of time on Discords, right? Like if you're seeing projects that have launched that are very early and you don't know how to, you know, assess, right? A lot of the time I go into these Discords, I speak to the founders, I ask them questions, and I start to understand what they're trying to build. And I actually think when you're assessing a project, especially within crypto, I think people it's understated sometimes how important community is, right? Like you could build amazing technology, right? But if the community is not there, it will not succeed, right? And I think a perfect example of this is Cardano, right? Like I'm not trying to give a slight, but I think like Cardano's tech is not the most flashiest, but they built amazing community, right? Like they don't have the craziest technology, but they have an amazing community and they got traction, right? I think, and you're now seeing this now with Doge, Sheep, right? Like these coins are essentially meme coins, but they have amazing communities and they exist, and they will probably always exist, right? They probably got Lindy effect. They're probably Lindy now at this point, so they'll never go away. So I think like that's important, right? Is assessing the community within crypto, because the day crypto goes public, like when you launch these protocols, they're public from day one, right? And the one of the biggest denominators for these of value for these protocols are truly the community. So it's very important to understand how these protocols or these founders treat their community, how strong the community is, because that gives you a good tell of where this is probably going to go, right? If the community is very strong and they believe in this, it's probably a good tell into like where you could see this going. Again, this is just ways of doing due diligence. Another thing that I would kind of talk about in this space, especially from, I would say, the angel side, right? Like if you wanted to get into actual angel investing, right? Like, you know, investing, you know, like at the private stage or like pre-launch, right? It's very competitive nowadays, right? Like I think there's a lot of capital in the world. I'm sure you guys have seen A16Z, I would say Paradigm, you know, a lot of these big funds, they've raised billion-dollar funds, Multicoin, for example, multi-billion-dollar funds. And rounds are starting to get way more competitive because a lot of these founders and teams are more likely to go to these, you know, VCs, right? They'd rather have these big name VCs than, you know, a small angel investor. So like, how do you become an angel investor, and how can you be considered as an investor, you know, next to A16Z, for example, right? Or these other big funds. And I think the way is it doesn't happen overnight. You have to build your network, right? The space is only going to keep growing. You know, I think, for example, Polkadot India it's going to be a community, I feel, of like builders, right? People who are interested, curious. And I think those are eventually, right? I'm sure there'll be people that will come out of, you know, this community that will probably build a protocol, right? Like within Polkadot. And you guys all together in this community will kind of engage with each other, right? So I think what I'm trying to get is like, you want to build your networks from day one and you'll eventually get there, right? Always keep speaking to builders, always be intellectually curious, right? Because I think a lot of people don't realize, they say, what can I contribute? What can I contribute? But even if you're a simple user, for example, right? And you just provide user feedback, right? For protocols or to founders, right? If you're an investor, that's actually very critical information to provide people, is what is my feedback as a user and how can I improve it, right? That's like the most simple thing that I would say. And I think like kind of being there from day one and like adding, that's how you could quite literally add value, right? So I think doing stuff like that, activities like that, and helping build your network and engaging with these founders, right, is ways for you, I think, for you to build not only your social credibility, right, of like saying, oh wow, this guy or this girl is like super interesting, like I enjoy our conversations. I think it's a way for you to kind of slowly get to your path of becoming an angel investor and building kind of reputation between, you know, I guess teams, founders, what have you. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of I guess a very simple way to say it. I think kind of how to become an angel investor, I think, takes time, right? So it does not happen overnight. You have to learn, keep learning, you have to further yourself and build your network and be active, right? I think within India as well, go to these meetups, speak to everyone, right? Like I think those are super critical. And I think with the internet world, right, you don't have to go in person anymore, and crypto is mostly online. So network in these discords, go into these, you know, now especially there's now DAOs, right? I'm sure you guys have heard of DAOs. There's so many different DAOs that exist in today's world. I think engaging in those DAOs is a great way to kind of build your brand value as a person. Say, hey, I can contribute, I can do this. Going to these DAOs, being super active and contributing is a great starting point. I think that did not exist for a while, but I think these DAOs are all public. So it's a lot easier for you to understand where you want to be. There's different DAOs with different interests. You can go there, maybe, you know, sign up to be a contributor, right? And then you'll build an amazing network, right? It's truly a global network. And I think that's a beauty of the crypto ecosystem. So I think another thing as well that's super important within the space, and I'll also kind of get to Polkadot because it is Polkadot conference or Polkadot webinar, so I will talk about Polkadot projects. But I think like another thing that's super important is like valuations, right? I think when you're investing into projects, how do you evaluate, like, I think evaluating, okay, so I think there's two ways. How do you evaluate a project, right? Which is like, is the tech stack make sense, right? The technology, what chain are they building on, right? Like, are they building on Polkadot? Are they like on Substrate? and within the Polkadot ecosystem, actually, I'll get to that. I think what chain are they building, right? Like, as I said earlier, Solana, ETH, there's, even Tezos, for example. Some people are doing NFTs on Tezos, right? For example. And then there's also like, do they need a multi-bridge setup, right? Which is built on Polkadot, right? Like, will they benefit from having multi-chain interactions? But I think the thing that I want to talk about is like valuations, right? Like, when you're evaluating these projects, do you actually believe that, for example, I think like 2 years ago, I think Rune, Thorchain, right? For those that know, it's multi-chain infrastructure. I think it was worth like $10 million for a while, the market cap. But what they were targeting at that time, and I think today the product that they're targeting was a multi-chain world, right? Making trustless swapping of assets between any chain. And when you think about that, I think that the valuation of that, the perceived value of where that could go if it was to get success, right? And be the number one kind of bridge between different chains. I think that would just, if it was realized, it was super valuable, right? We're talking tens of 20 to $30 billion, right? If it was to succeed at 10 to 20 million, the valuation kind of made sense, right? Like, so I think like when you're investing, you want to make sure you're not buying into something that's super overvalued. For example, there were a lot of IDOs that happened. I think between January 2021 to around like February, there was a lot of like scams that were happening within the Polkadot ecosystem. There was a lot of, they call them Polkadot projects, but they were just launching an ERC20 chain. They're launching an ERC20 token on the Ethereum chain, and they were doing some IDO where they would give like, let's say 1% of the, circulating of the total supply, and they would raise, we're talking like $1 million. They would raise like $1 million. Okay, they'd raise like $3 million, right? And they give 1%. So that's like $300 million fully diluted valuation, right? Okay, I'll just take a step back because some of you guys might not understand what fully diluted is. So in the crypto space, there's circulating supply, right? And there's the total supply. And a lot of these projects that launch, they have token lockups, right? So they release over time. So 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, depends on the project. And there's two really key metrics that people use in the space. There's the circulating supply, right? And the circulating market cap, and the fully diluted market cap. And the circulating market cap is basically a calculation of how many tokens are in supply today, and you multiply that times the price, and that's your current market cap. And then there is the valuation of the protocol, right? Which is, okay, there's tokens that are locked up. Why don't we put those in the calculation, right? So the total supply today, right, in circulation plus the ones locked up times the price, right? And then that'll give you your fully diluted valuation, right? And I think like there were certain points in this cycle, right? I think because we were in a bull market, I would say that fully diluted valuations tend to not really matter that much, because the market is just, it's basically like a buyer's market. People just don't really care. But I think when the market contracts, right, is actually when you start to find good deals. So ideally, you want to find deals where the fully diluted valuation is a lot lower, because that kind of de-risks your project, your investment, right? The risk reward will increase, right? Like, I think ideally you want to find and research, if you want to have the biggest upside, in my opinion, I think you want to spend time on the ground doing significant research, understanding what deals make sense, and ideally you want to find them under 50 to 75 million fully diluted. I think those are the best risk reward, but obviously you have to spend an extensive time researching and finding those. So I think I just, kind of talk about one last thing before I wrap up here. I think like, okay, so I'll talk about two more things. I think like within the Polkadot ecosystem, I think the fully diluted valuation is very critical, right? I think we're now going to see parachain offerings happening on Polkadot, I believe on November 11th. There was the Kusama parachain offerings that happened. I think 2 batches happened, one in the summer. One happened in, I think like a month ago. And there was a project that I invested into called Hydra DX. And I think like it kind of why am I mentioning it? Is because it had this idea of like evaluating it from a valuation perspective. They did an LBP, which was liquidity bootstrapping protocol. And I specifically looked at this project because I saw that they had an amazing community. I went into the Discord, I spoke to their founders, and they always made everything community first, which was like, that's huge, right? Because you always want projects that care about their community, because that means that they're not purely greedy, right? And they're there to stick around for the long time, right? Anyone that cares about their community has a long-term vision. And that's a way for you to actually do due diligence on your projects, is you want someone that actually cares and thinks long-term, right? That's part of your assessment of what is a good kind of, let's say, investment. That was like one thing that stuck out to me kind of in my process for this project. The second thing is they did a raise. The LBP was like, they gave 5% of their kind of tokens, and they priced it according to making sure that the fully diluted valuation would not be that high for the general public. And it would be very favorable relative to what the private investors got, right? So I think I really appreciated that. And more recently, they created like a blog post, and they said that they're increasing the allocation that they gave to their founders because they believe that community is number one. So yeah, I mean, I didn't know about this. This was a year ago I made this investment, but this is exactly what I'm trying to say, is like, you want to make sure that you get a really good vibe from these founders and that their vision is aligned with what you think, right? It's super critical. I think like the last thing for Polkadot, like auctions, it's really interesting because the projects get due diligence because it's in the Polkadot ecosystem. If you actually win the parachain offering, it's in a way saying that it's signaling that you've actually succeeded, right? You've got the community on board. You were able to raise the funds, and you made it. So ideally, like a lot of these projects that launch, they will be successes, at least in the medium to short term. And they will be pretty due diligence because they've got community backing. But my only thing is like, make sure you take part in like parachain offerings where they actually give a good amount of the token allocation to the parachain participants, right? You don't want like 1% offering for the parachain offering. You want to look for 5, like I would say 10, 15, 20, and then the valuations make a lot more sense. But yeah, I think my last thoughts, right, for this, and then I guess we have questions, is like, keep learning, and the space is super big. Find people that kind of genuinely push yourself intellectually, and just keep focusing on things that interest you, right? If you spend enough time here, you're gonna find things that interest you, and just keep honing in on that and like improve your understanding and like perception of it. I think eventually like build and work together with other people. That's how I kind of think it's like PVE, right? In gaming, like player versus environment. That's how I think about it. And just, I think if you put in the work, you go to these, meetups, you join these communities, you will learn a lot, and these opportunities will eventually present themselves to you. You will find that deal or that project that just clicks, it makes sense, and the deal. And the valuations will most probably, because you will have put that time to be early to like, you put in that work, the valuations will probably be good at that point. So it kind of all comes together step by step. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's all I would say. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Karthik. We have a couple of questions for you, so let's take them. First one is, how much value do white papers still hold in Isle of Investors, where almost all real or fake projects have white papers, especially when they are done up by professionals? So how do you evaluate such projects who get professionals to do it for them?
Yeah, so, I mean, that's a great question. There's a lot of raises that I've seen recently where they didn't have any documents, as a matter of fact, which is true, kind of crazy. The market is pretty hot. I would say the white papers, I mean, they are interesting. I think they're good for due diligence, right? But I would say that a lot of projects nowadays, especially DeFi ones, do not have white papers. They kind of launch first and then figure it out. I think like if you saw your traditional layer ones, I think like, so I mean, the answer to that question is, I think they're cool if you want to learn, but I don't think they make or break an investment. from an investment standpoint. I think like there's a lot of Medium posts, there's a lot of documentation that projects will give or protocols that will give that will provide a value of how for you to understand these projects. I don't think you actually need your white paper. I think there's a lot of light papers that people do, or like Medium blog posts that explain their protocol thoroughly, and I think that's enough really to evaluate.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, the next one. What's the future of Polkadot blockchain development ecosystem in context of India, especially when we do not have a regulated market?
Yeah, I mean, this is something we think about a lot from the fund, right? It's like, I think the highest risk investments within India are definitely brokerages or anything that touches the fiat space, because it's not very clear, right? There's not really clear guidance within India. So I think those are the highest risk. I mean, that hasn't stopped funding going into the space. I mean, there's a lot of big funds that are investing. I think CoinSwitch is raising, or they might have raised. But yeah, I think like for Polkadot specifically, or I think like there shouldn't be any issues because I think like I don't think there's any problem for people building or launching protocols, right? Or DeFi applications or stuff like that, or NFT applications. I think the big risk, at least from a regulatory standpoint, again, I'm not an expert, but just what my general understanding is, like the highest risk are definitely brokerages. So I guess my answer to that question is that I think there's no problem for Polkadot. I think it's basically clear skies. Like I think you guys could build really anything. And I'm kind of excited because now once the crowd loans start, the first round of crowd loans start, like I think in 2-3 weeks, I wouldn't be surprised. I think the excitement will happen. I'm waiting to see the first Indian founder to do their first crowd loan in India. I think on Polkadot. I think that'll be a pretty cool moment in space, like in the space, right? And I think that will allow, and I think that'll give motivation to others to kind of take that journey. I think we're probably in this year itself, we're probably going to see a bunch of Indian projects come and launch and do it might not be on Polkadot, it might be on Kusama, but I think we'll see it. Founding teams come out of India as the space evolves.
Great. All right. Next question from Amit is, could you highlight the key differentiators between Polkadot and Cosmos?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think Polkadot and Cosmos, they're definitely proponents of the multi-chain world. They basically created that idea starting in 2017, 2016, but I think publicly 2017. I think both of them have different trade-offs, right? I think the belief for Polkadot, so I think both of their general beliefs was just like the world is multi-chain, but I think Cosmos believes that they believe in sovereign chains, right? Not shared security. So they built an SDK that has a plug and play approach to building a blockchain and deploying it, but you have to find your validator set, right? You have to find your own validator set, and you can be fully interoperable, right? So you're now seeing multiple chains, right? I'm sure you guys have heard of Luna, right? For example, you've heard of Binance Chain, there's Secret Network, right? These are all chains that exist by themselves. They're their own, and they have their own projects that launch within like their own blockchain. So I would say Cosmos is a blockchain framework, but to build sovereign chains. Polkadot is a little different. They took a different approach. They actually made it a lot easier, in my opinion, to build, because they said, don't worry about validator set, don't worry about security. We'll share that with you. All you have to do is build your blockchain, right? So in Polkadot, they have something called a beacon chain, right? And I believe that shares the consensus and it shares the trust with any chain that builds. You have to do a parachain offering to get onboarded onto this chain. But once you're onboarded onto the Polkadot chain, you can interoperate with any other chains that are on this, the Polkadot ecosystem or the Kusama ecosystem. So I think they took them a little bit different. Cosmos did sovereignty first, and Polkadot did shared security first. But I believe we're going to start seeing both networks do the opposite, because I think the future I think Polkadot said that they're looking at sovereignty after shared security goes live fully. And it looks like Cosmos is exploring shared security. So, they're basically solving the same things. They just took two different approaches. But I'm kind of excited because the beauty of having two technology stacks is that it attracts two different types of developers. And I think for us in the blockchain or the crypto space is as long as we get more developers, that's all that matters, in my opinion. It's a net win for the space.
Great. Okay, we have one more from Prashant. That is, what is that one red flag which you often see in crypto projects that will stop you from going ahead with the funding process?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think like finding very greedy founders is, or like very greedy, limited information about the project, right? Very greedy, I think founders is always usually a very big red flag. I think like a lot of these things that are super hyped on Twitter or like overly hyped, a lot of them turn out to be like duds because they're either very high valuations. But I think like one thing that's super critical is transparency between, you know, you will be able to speak and understand about the project, right? I think that there's limited information about the project and you're unable to get an idea of what that project is. And I think that kind of relates to the white paper question, right? Like you don't need a white paper, but if there's significant, like I would say there's a good community, right? If there's significant writings and explanations about how the protocol works, what they're trying to do, I think those are ways to like de-risk your project. I think those are the key things, is just making sure that there's significant documentation. It doesn't have to be a white paper, but you have to be at a point where you actually understand what they're doing. I think that's super important. If people are very esoteric, very money grabby, or they're just doing a fork of a project, I'm always like kind of wary of that, right?
So that's clarity of great. So I guess that's clarity of thought put down on paper or text, but as long as they're able to put across their idea to you very clearly, right? Okay, our last question. How do you get to know whether a community is strong, and the 3 things you look for before investing?
So community strong said 3 things I look for? Is that what you said?
Your top 3.
Yeah. So I think like, great question. I think like now community is a lot easier to assess. Back in the day, it would be just Telegram, right? And I think people still use Telegram, but Telegram is very like, I think like there's less depth to Telegram. There's a lot of like, it's just like one stream of thought. And Discord, I think now Discord is, it's a lot easier to assess community now, more so than even speculators. I think speculators are cool, but like you want to have people that are actually intellectually curious, they're potentially builders that are looking at this protocol, right? That's a high quality community, people who are engaging, right? More so than just speculation. Speculation is cheap, right? When the market is good, they'll come, and when the market's bad, they'll go away. So you want to kind of assess a community. Like with Discord, the depth of it has increased substantially. There's different topics, subgenres, and there'll be like different stuff around like the protocol. The least being speculation. Most will be like different use cases, different features they're testing, and then you'll see all these different people in these kind of participating and engaging in these, you know, different kind of thought exercises within these Discords. So I think a project that has a very extensive Discord is usually a very good sign, right? And you see people engaging and not talking about speculation, right? I think that's always a very good sign if people are actually interested about the product and genuinely curious about how it works, right? Those are usually extremely good signs of a good community, who are long-term minded and who are kind of in this intent to like see that this thing succeeds, right? Usually if it's only speculation or trading, that's usually not a good sign, in my opinion. But yeah, I think the 3 things for me when it comes to investing is just like, look at the valuations, look at the community, see the technology stack, right? You don't want to go and build, like, I think investing in a technology stack that is not, that you don't see the network effects in is high risk, right? Like if someone came to me and said, would you invest in this project on the Stellar blockchain, or would you, like, not Stellar, I would say, like, if you were to invest on something like Cardano blockchain or something like that, sure, it could do well, but you want to make sure that it will actually succeed, right? Like I think like Solana has a massive ecosystem, right? Like if you build something, you know you're going to get network effects. You build on Polkadot, you know that the ecosystem is huge, right? Like the community is amazing, right? The builder community, we're here today, right? There's so many people on this call, right? So there's interest. you want to make sure that the project you're investing to will potentially have some effects, or you actually see a future where they can grow, right? I think you don't want to build in some dead spot. Like I think building an application, for example, on Tezos might not be interesting, but building NFTs on Tezos is interesting, right? Because they have a massive ecosystem, right? So if you invest in NFTs there, it actually could be interesting, right? Because there's a huge ecosystem. So it's kind of understanding what makes sense where, on what protocol, and what you think probably has the best chance of success. I think the last thing for me, like the third thing I would say, like I think like being early and being like, I think like seeing a project grow is always a really cool thing for me, right? As I see a project like start small and then I see the progress of these things, you know, the founder go through their journey publicly in a public domain, right? We're talking, you know, through Twitter, through Discord, through whatever channels they have, seeing it grow. Those are things that I personally really like, right? And because you see progress, right? So I think that would be probably the third thing that really assesses and how I get to my kind of point of, okay, I want to participate, I want to invest and take part in this kind of project.
Great. Thanks, Karthik. I think this was much required for many of us. It's always very tricky when it comes to cracking your investors. So to hear all about how projects are truly evaluated is quite the relief, to be honest. So welcome to Polkadot India again, Karthik, and we're really glad to have you in the family. Thanks for your time.
Yeah. Yep. Thanks for having me, Anya. Thank you, Amit. It's a pleasure talking to you guys, and I hope to be back sometime soon.
Thanks, Karthik.